So sometimes we meet people who, when we are in their orbit, we think, I want more. And that is how I felt about Colin after I first met him. Podcasting is really what brought us together. I had a beautiful opportunity to be a guest on his wonderful podcast, Superhuman Academy, which y'all should check out. But immediately after a conversation, I was like, oh, I need to talk to this person more. I want to be in his orbit. I love his energy, his presence. And so I was really stoked, absolutely jazzed when Colin agreed to be a guest on Plan Go Plan. So welcome, Colin. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks. That was really sweet.
So I know that you spend time just thinking about what it is to be human and how we human. And I would love to know, is there an experience, is there a story that led you to being so curious about all of this?
I don't think I've ever been asked that question that way mentally right now, kind of skipping back through my life. And I discovered recently I was writing an email to my son that he'll hopefully read in like 13 years or something like that. And I was reflecting on something similar to this. And I realized that a lot of the things that I'm really passionate about right now and that I might call a life mission or like guiding star, it's just me being more conscious of the things that I have always done and pursued and naturally fell into. Like when I was on the playground as a little kid, I still have like distinct memories of going around the outside. The school I went to had like a track around the playground. I still have distinct memories of scanning from, I would stand in the middle of the playground, like scanning the horizon of our little play yard and looking for anyone who was by themselves, on the outskirts, like literally on the outskirts, like off on the sidewalk or something. And that being how I made some of my best friends. So I would, oh, look, there's someone who doesn't have any friends. That's an easy one. That was like my little kid mentality. It's like if I want to have a friend, find someone who has no friends. And there you go, easy friend. And like now looking back, it's like, oh, that's kind of like I don't know, it kind of sounds depressing, but it's not like it was really just that's naturally how I operated. It was like, oh, well, they don't have anyone they're hanging out with yet. Maybe they'll hang out with me. And so I'll go talk to them. And I did that as a small child. I did that all through high school. I did that in college. I do that now. And I think part of it is like I have this really innate desire to find the beauty in people that others haven't discovered yet.
Mm.
And it's like there are some people whose beauty is just on display and it's really obvious and everyone really just appreciates it and stands in the glow and are enjoying it. But then there's, probably a countless swath of people whose beauty is not noticed or appreciated. To me, part of that is sad. Like part of it, I do feel like a grief and a sadness about that. But then on the other hand, I also feel like this explorer's excitement of like, that's a bunch of territory that hasn't been sought out. Like there's a whole cave system over there that no one's gone into, and I know that it's full of gold if I just kind of like look around. And I'm consciously articulating that now. I didn't think of it that way throughout my life, but I think that's kind of the spirit that has motivated me is like, I wonder what's beautiful about this person. It's not obvious yet, but if I go talk to them, maybe I'll find out. And I consistently have, and that's continued to inspire me.
It's so fascinating for me to hear you describe that experience of being a kid on the playground and looking for friends. And it struck me because it connected so fiercely with my own memories of elementary school. And, for me, also wanting people to feel like they belong and looking for the opportunities that I could invite people to belong. Well, even I think I was kind of out on the margins. I was also, out on the outside and sort of not ever feeling really that self-conscious about it, but also wanting to invite other people to join me on the
Yeah.
edges.
Did I tell you about the Blue Crew last time we talked?
No, no, tell me.
Okay, I'll share this real quick because what you're saying is in high school, I had my little group of friends. There were probably like six of us, and we'd all wear our like same blue track sweatshirts like every day, and kind of tongue in cheek called ourselves the Blue Crew. No one else called us that. And at it was like straight out of a high school drama movie or something. But every day, almost every day, we would sit in the lunchroom in this corner, and then there would just be empty space for like, I don't know, 30 feet in all directions from our corner. And then all of the rest of the students would be then outside of that perimeter. It was like we had this force field. And there were at least two occasions that I remember distinctly where one of the quote unquote popular girls from the the table that was just full of people would come over and ask, "Hey, can I sit with you?" And then that whole table over there would erupt with laughter because it was clearly like on a dare to come talk to us. And then of course they wouldn't sit with it. We'd be like, "Sure, why not?" And then they'd walk away. But it just reminded me of that like I that didn't bother me at all. I actually was like I was really happy with my little group of guys. It was a great time, and I'm still great friends with them. Like, yeah, I was. It was totally like I was on the outside, but I didn't feel like an outsider. It was like this is our little group, and I enjoy it, and I invite people into it, and like let's enjoy our little weird bubble over here. But yeah, I just connected with what you said.
I love that it's almost like this feeling of recognizing that there's something that's different or disconnected at the same time, feeling like I still belong here. I have a sense that, I've got my crew, my blue crew, and I think that that's lovely. You mentioned that you were writing this letter to your son and that you were explaining what your current passions are. What would you describe those current passions as?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I described finding the beauty in people, but specifically, I am very passionate about helping men make deep friendships with other men.
Mm.
And it's just such a need in our world. It's I think that was something I was passionate about on the playground. I was like I wanted to make friends and then help those friends make friends. And I've always naturally defaulted towards inviting people from different areas of my life who don't know each other into the same space. And that seems very normal to me. And I have been repeatedly informed throughout my life that that's weird. Of like, wait, why are you inviting that person? They don't know anybody else who's coming to this thing. And so like I'll put together groups and I'm like, all right, here's some of my family members. Here's a friend that I used to work with. Here's someone from high school. Here's someone from college. We're all gonna hang out tonight and no one knows each other and it's gonna be great. And that's how I operate. And I've realized that while that is unusual, it is very powerful in creating possibility for deep friendships to form. And so I've taken that from my, the realm of my unconscious and made it much more conscious of a deliberate, like, I have a passion and mission in life to help men be friends with each other instead of being isolated or feeling like they are in competition with the rest of the world, which is very common.
I think that connector superpower of yours is really a superpower. I can think of some people in my life that I'm like, ooh, you are such a connector. You know how to connect people to each other in really meaningful ways. And it's interesting, right before you and I met, my kind of work task for this morning is I am writing an additional addition to a gender and communication textbook. So I'm deep into sort of thinking about how our cultural norms impact how we understand our gendered lives. So thinking about men and friendship and these things that either invite that or create barriers between it. And so, I would be interested in knowing what you see some of the barriers are to men and friendships because with a son and, even my husband and I were walking this morning and we walk our kids to school every day and then we get to walk home with each other. And that's such a lovely time for us to just chit chat for a bit. And I was like, ooh, I've been struggling with my friendship goals for next year. And he said, this is a part of that I have always needed to work on. And so I just love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, what I've experienced is it's very common for me to interact with a man, and during our conversation, it'll be the first time we've ever talked. They will reveal to me that this is like the deepest conversation that they've had in 10 years or ever or in a long time. And the conversation we're having is, I mean, it's nothing crazy. It's like we're just talking about life, just like, hey, what's going on? Not something I would typically classify as like a deep conversation, but they experience it that way because every conversation that they have is logistical. Like in their when they're at work. All their conversations are problem solving oriented. They're logistical. Who's going to do what? What am I supposed to do? What are my deadlines? What are the expectations? What are my responsibilities? The family conversations often go that way as well. And even if they do have deeper conversations with their partner or spouse, there's a very different dynamic between like male friends. And there's something important about that. And when, at least for me, in my experience growing up, it's like the way that guys made friends, as far as I could see, was you'd be in the same place at the same time doing the same activity. That was it, you know? All right. I showed up to play tennis. You showed up to play tennis. We're playing tennis together. And then if we do that on a somewhat regular basis, now we're tennis buddies or whatever. Like that's what ends up kind of happening. It like you're probably not going to go to any playground and find a group of boys sitting in a circle just talking to each other. Very uncommon. Like they're going to be doing something. They're going to have some sort of activity. They're playing a game together. And nowadays, it's very common for men to have no shared games. There's work, but work is perceived as it's competitive
Mm.
and it's usually not cooperative. And so like where are the cooperative games that men are playing together? They're hard to find. Most of them are online at this point. Like a lot of, older men are playing video games now. It's like, well, that's because that's one of the only places to cooperate with other men. But it's not an in-person relationship a lot of the times. And there's something about that that's special and really important. And so I think that's a big part of it is like what I've been seeing is that lack of opportunity for cooperative play in the adult spheres for men. And since they don't tend to just get together and talk in a circle, which would be a really convenient way to connect, but it's not one that comes naturally to a lot of men or is very comfortable, then it's like they're kind of left with nothing. And unless somebody invites them to something repeatedly, they often won't initiate or seek it out. And that's not all men, but it's a lot of them, and that's what I see. And so I've just basically made it an effort. Like, what does it look like to create spaces in which men can play cooperative games, even if they're competitive or whatever. They're really like for the sake of having fun together, not for being the best or beating each other at something. And then I don't really do anything else like other than that. Like I don't try to like, hey, you guys need to be friends or anything. I just create the space and set a bit of a tone and then just let it happen.
Yeah.
That seems to work.
So much of what you're describing does align with not only my own observations, but a lot of the research that I've done. And it sparked this thought that I had a few weeks ago that I don't know that I've voiced out loud since it first emerged, which is I was rereading, I've been slowly working through Brene Brown's newest book, Strong Ground. And as I was doing it, I was thinking about, my introduction to her around vulnerability. And it kind of occurred to me how much of vulnerability is really breaking the norms of different identity categories. So, what might be vulnerable for a woman in a workplace, for example, might be being really assertive in a meeting, but
Mhm.
expressing emotion in the workplace might be commonplace or expected or not necessarily out of bounds. Where, I'm thinking about the vulnerability of having a deep conversation. And my initial impression with you, we had a 15-minute sort of introduction meeting. And I was like, I left that meeting, I was like, holy crap, that was intense. 15 minutes. And I loved it. I'm not someone who loves small talk, and I want to get into juicy stuff really quick with people. And you do have a presence, you have a way of holding space that says, we're going to be deeply human together. Do you feel like you're able to put words to or describe maybe the recipe of what you cook up that makes that space?
And I appreciate the challenge. Let's see. Well, I think part of it is that orientation I talked about before of for whatever reason, my natural inclination has, as far as I can remember, since I was a small child, to seek the beauty in other people.
Mm.
And it's just an assumption that it's there. And I realize now that's not an assumption that comes naturally to everybody, but that has been my assumption. And so I tend to go into any conversation like looking for that. And I'm like, like what's beautiful about you? And if I'm not seeing it, that doesn't mean it's not there. It means that I'm not looking the right way. And so it just all that prompts for me is further curiosity and further questioning and attempting to shift my angle so I can see it. And there are a lot of things that I might see that I don't perceive as beautiful. And again, that's the same thing. It's like, well, what is it about how I'm looking at it that causes me to see that as not beautiful? What is the angle at which that becomes beautiful to me? How do I have to change my position and where I'm standing to see that in a way that I see the light of it? And obviously, I articulate that in a way that now that I never would have throughout my life, as a kid or anything like that. But that's what I was doing. I didn't, and I don't tend to come in with the assumption of I'm better, I'm superior, my way of doing things is better, my way of thinking is superior, I'm right. I I tend to come in just looking for where's the beauty and how can I see it. And I think that I've had people tell me before that I'm one of the least judgmental people that they've ever met. And when I first heard people say that, I think the first time I heard someone say that was probably like 6 years ago. And it struck me. And part of what struck me about it was like, I have never really thought of myself as a judgmental person, but people used to perceive me as judgmental. And so to hear somebody say that was like, oh, something's changed. And then I heard that from multiple other people. It's like, oh, okay, well, what has been true for me inside is now somehow becoming true on the outside. I think that's part of what you're describing is like, what is that recipe that causes that sensation? And I'm still unpacking that. I think part of it was that I learned how to use my face better.
Nonverbals matter.
Yeah, yeah. My wife told me at some point that some of her friends had said that her friends thought that I hated them, and that struck me as being so strange because like, how on earth are they coming to that? Like, that's not true at all. Like, how could anyone think that? That's so strange. And I forget how I came across this, but maybe it might have been, I don't know. Somehow I was informed that asymmetrical facial expressions often interpreted as judgmental. And then I started to look at how my face moved and realized it was very asymmetrical. Like the way that I used to express curiosity was always one eyebrow up.
Yeah.
And so I'm going around curious as heck all the time. And what other people are receiving from that was skepticism, judgment. And that was a game changer for me because like, oh my goodness, this misalignment with who I am inside and how some people are receiving me might be the matter of one of my eyebrows, not following the other when I'm interacting with people. And I literally practiced like on Zoom and in the mirror, I would look at myself and I'd make sure that both of my eyebrows were going up. So that was one of the silly things, but like legitimately made a huge difference. It was like, oh, I'm a very curious, non-judgmental person, but people experience me as judgmental, not curious because of how my eyebrows move and how my facial expressions look. So I practiced that, and then once that became more aligned, that's when those types of comments started to come out, and I was like, oh, finally, okay, so like there's that's working, or something about that works. Like people are seeing who I am and how I experience myself. And since then, I think it's more of I've become a lot more aware of my own emotional states, especially in the past couple of years. And I think I might have shared this with you last time, but something that I realized I could say is that I'm not afraid of feeling any feelings.
Mhm.
And that came out of my mouth at one point. And then when I heard it, I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And because it rang out as true. And there was an incredible like liberation of that realization. Like, oh, I can just feel things. I don't have to stuff them. I can just feel them. I can feel them in front of you. I can show you that I'm feeling them. I can say that I'm feeling them. And that's okay. Huh. Well, that's interesting. And so a lot of in my interactions now, I'm very intentional about sharing what I'm feeling with a word, a name, a label, preferably more than one. So when people ask like, "Hey, how are you doing?" I don't just say, "Good, how are you?" I approach it with curiosity of like, "I don't know how I'm feeling. Let me check. I'll get back to you on that." I check in with myself. I actually like tune into my body and then like, "Oh, interesting. I'm feeling." And then I share. Like right now, I'm feeling pleasantly relaxed. I'm feeling appreciated by you. I'm feeling thoughtful and engaged right now.
It's one of the things I think struck me when we first met is probably out of habit. I asked you, how are you? And not because I'm not curious, but I do think it's habitual for me to
Yeah.
ask that. And I loved that you took that question seriously. And it was a prompt for you. You just verbalized out loud what I could sort of see happening non-verbally, which is
Mhm.
that you were checking in with yourself and you would take a moment and then you would express. how you felt. And I thought that that was really lovely. And I actually then noticed that I tried on your practice a few times after we'd met. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna like actually, how am I?
Yeah.
Use it as a prompt to actually really check in
Mhm.
and then learn how to articulate back what exactly it is that I'm feeling. One of the things that I was so struck by too, as you were talking, is this connection between, or maybe disconnection sometimes that we have between what our internal experience of something is and how it is received by others and the external experience of it. And, one of the questions that I had for you is you have this deep curiosity, this search for beauty in things. Are you able to turn that onto yourself? Are you
Mhm.
able? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that that's my internal experience of myself too. And another reason when I heard that comment about being non-judgmental, it was it was a big relief for me. 'Cause it was like finally like that is how I experience myself. People talk about the inner critic like it's just a thing that everybody has. And it's like, no, you don't have to have an inner critic. Like, and I would say that I rarely have any voice in my head that I would describe that way. And what I've realized too is like, if you do describe something that way, a part of yourself as like the inner critic, or I've heard other people use terms like saboteur or things like that. It's like, does that part of yourself also call itself that? Have you ever bothered to ask it what it calls itself or how it
Mhm.
experiences itself? Because I know for me, the part that would most likely be labeled as inner critic by someone else, if they were like looking into my brain somehow, describes itself as protector. It feels very offended by the term inner critic because it's like, no, I'm here because I love you and I want to keep you safe. I'm not here to destroy or judge. Like, and so, yeah, internally, again, since childhood, I've not been very self-critical almost ever. I don't have much judgment towards myself. I have had a very strong protector element, and like people who know me well, especially from when I'm younger, will say that I could really defend myself verbally, and I would get very defensive about things. I'd get less defensive now as I've recognized what that is. But yeah, it wasn't turned inward as an inner critic. It was a like, no, like there's beauty in me too. You're just not seeing it. I wish you could see it.
It's kind of been an uncanny conversation for me because there are ways that you have described, even your childhood and how you see other people that is so aligned with my own experience. And I don't know that I've met very many people that have been able to articulate that it's kind of weirding me out just a little.
Amazing.
It's uncanny. And, one of my own struggles with seeing beauty in other people is that I get very frustrated when they can't see it in themselves sometimes.
Mm,
And I can get very frustrated with other people too, because I do think I can see the beauty in myself.
mhm.
And that feels like such a weird thing to sort of say out loud sometimes. But I also get very frustrated if others can't see that in me.
Yeah.
So I get frustrated if I feel like others, are, like I want to shake it into people.
Yes. Yeah, I
You
totally get
know,
that.
you're
The whole shake
amazing.
the shoulders. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, can't you see that? Like, and also someone who hasn't, I I don't have a particularly loud inner critic. I have moments, but it's rare. In fact, like I thought that that was so commonplace that I remember actually having a conversation with my therapist and asking her if she thought I was a narcissist because I liked myself
Mhm.
and I like being in my own mind.
Mhm.
And so she kind of had to reassure me that that was actually a healthy thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that weird? Yeah. Yeah. I love being in my own mind. It's a wonderful place. And the risk for me is getting stuck there too much, like, because I can play there all the time and I've had to learn to balance that. But yeah, like it's not narcissism to see the beauty in yourself. And I think it's difficult to see beauty in other people if you can't see it in yourself
Mm,
and vice versa. Like, so I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but like the things that we tend to reject in other people are things that we reject in ourselves, right? And so there are people who they will be very willing and able to name and label things that they see that they think are good or admirable in other people, but can't see those things in themselves. But what I've noticed about that is when they tend to be applying those names and labels to other people, it's still in the paradigm of judgment. It's good, bad, right, wrong. Like, oh, you're so good at that, which hopefully you could hear in my tone there. There's still an edge to that of like a jealousy, whatever. Like, it's not really seeing the beauty in people when you're still applying like a even a quote unquote positive judgment. That's not the same thing as observing beauty. It's like when you observe beauty, like if you just imagine like seeing a beautiful sunset or something like that, people don't really say, "Oh, wow, that's such a good sunset." It's a totally different way of experiencing it. It's just like it's this warmth, it's this awe. It's I want to look at that more, or it's inspiring. It's that curious, like those curious feelings bubbling up that it's a that's very different from positive judgment. And I think those two things can get confused. And if you're just operating in a judgmental frame, whether it's positive or negative, that's not the same thing as experiencing beauty.
Mhm.
And so if you can practice looking out towards others or looking towards yourself, or even just looking out at the world, whatever, and capturing, oh, what's that sense that comes with that awe, that appreciation, that desire to enjoy it more and just bask in it, just be in its presence, whatever, and then take that kind of framing and then attempt to find that in yourself and other people. I think that tends to be much more effective than looking for like good, bad, right, wrong, better, worse, which just locks you into the same paradigm. It's like as soon as you activate something, you tend to activate its opposite. Like it's hard to think about good without thinking about bad. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful to you, but I've seen that. It's usually not that people can see beauty in others and can't see it in themselves. It's usually that they're not actually doing either. They're just applying positive judgment to others and positive or negative judgment to themselves, but that's still in the same paradigm.
Yeah.
That's functionally the same thing.
Well, I think that we live in a culture where there is this impulse to moralize a lot of things. As talking, I last night we had Northern Lights,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
it
we
was
had them here.
oh, it was so amazing. I gotten home from hot yoga and it was like, kids, get outside, and like, so we're out there in our socks and snuggies and they're like, what is that? And there's just so much like awe and wonder in the moment. It wasn't like, hey, was this a good enough
Yeah, right.
version of this
It doesn't
guy?
come.
Was this bad or was this good? You just experienced it, right? Like you
Yeah.
basked in it. And then, of course, like we got out our phones and we took photos, and it's so surprising because the photographs are a completely different experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Same thing.
and then I was so kind of just like fascinated by that experience too.
Mhm.
And how both were really beautiful, like the image on my phone as well as the actual ethereal experience. That they were different. They weren't one was better and one was worse, or one was more or less real than the other necessarily.
Yeah.
And
Yes, there it is. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about with like seeing the beauty in things of just like the picture only seems non-beautiful if you start to move into a judgmental paradigm instead, where you're not actually experiencing it for what it is. You're attempting to compare it to something else or to some sort of standard that you have or something like that. But to your point about like narcissism earlier, it's like narcissism is in a judgmental paradigm still, right? It's like I'm better than everyone else. I'm good. Like people should like me because I'm superior because whatever, all of that's in judgment. It's not the same thing as looking into yourself and being like, wow, that's beautiful.
yeah,
Just enjoy
yeah.
that.
So before I kind of wrap up this conversation, one of the things that I was also thinking about as we've talked is, I feel I'm like super into goal setting and planning, but I have such a different approach to it than I feel like maybe the traditional paradigms around that. I've heard so much as we, near the new year, you know, kind of like screw your emotions, just do the thing. And
Yeah.
I, I always itch. When I hear that, it makes me a little itchy because sometimes I think we do need to do the thing, but I want us to also honor the emotion, recognize the knowledge, the clarity. Yeah, I think it's epistemological for me. Emotions are these knowledge producing things. Like they're generative,
Mhm.
and so I get so squirrely when I hear that, like, oh, just, shove that emotion down. And I guess as we sort of wrap up, I would be interested in knowing how you use, I don't know, use feels like a weird word, but how emotions are generative for you.
Well, emotions they're interesting because they do a lot of different things at once. On one hand, they are informational feedback. That's a that's a very front of brain way to look at emotions. It's like, okay, the emotions are feedback I receive, and they tend to be goal-based feedback. They're relative to valued objectives, whether those are conscious or subconscious or whatever. And that is one way to think about emotions. And I emphasize the word think. That's how you think about emotions. That's like very front of brain. But emotions are also a motive energy within themselves. And so this is where, I mean, you take an animal out there that doesn't have nearly as much of a neocortex as we do, and they still have emotions. Those emotions are translated more directly into behaviors with less of that filtering in between that we often do. And it's very difficult to behave without emotion. And it's not impossible because we look at machines, they probably don't have emotions as far as I know, and they still do things. But what you're describing is when people say like shove the emotion and just do the thing, what they're talking about is dissociating.
Mm.
It's literally distancing yourself from the emotions, push them at an arm's length and do the thing and become a machine. And you can do that. And there's such a thing as functional dissociation. You can do it and it can be very effective and it can serve your purposes, but you're also a human. And so if you attempt to do that all the time, what you're doing is you're deferring maintenance. If you want to use a very robotic term, it's kind of like if you're getting a bunch of like lights flashing and things like that, and you have something that you need to do and those lights flashing are really distracting, you can press a button to like turn off all the notifications of stuff that's going on. But that doesn't mean the stuff isn't going on anymore. It just means that you're not paying attention to it. And if that stuff is important, and a lot of it probably is, then not paying attention to it isn't going to make it go away. It's just going to move it, and it's probably going to exacerbate it and cause it to build up over time. And so when people dissociate to do things, that's a temporary solution, and it has a cost, and that's the cost of deferred maintenance. You're pushing something back. You're going to have to deal with it later, and you probably have to deal with it with interest. And sometimes it's worth the interest. Absolutely. If you're in a crisis situation, you need to tourniquet and cut off a leg, it might be worth it. Defer the emotions, deal with them later, get the leg addressed. But I think people overuse that strategy like crazy and they pay some very, very steep costs on the back end. So, like the way that I tend to approach this is I don't use dissociation unless it's truly necessary for a reason of safety or something like that. And if I do, it's temporary dissociation with the intention of reassociation afterwards. Okay, I deferred some maintenance. It's time to go back and deal with that. Now that I'm in a safe environment, I'm in a safe place, I have some space, I'm going to go back and do that work. And that what that work consists of is probably the topic of a much longer conversation. But in the super brief version, it's what you talked about at the beginning of the checking in. What am I feeling? What do I feel as I access some of the memory content from that period of time in which I was dissociating? And then can I experience those feelings and process through them? And again, much longer conversation there, but that's the gist of it. And so, big picture, I don't recommend dissociation as a frequent tactic unless you're very unsafe a lot of the time, in which case you might use it to hopefully get yourself out of that situation. But if you're just using it to like lose an extra pound, pick a different tool. That's not the way to go.
One of the things that I really appreciate is how intentional it, like that. I also think that most of the time when we dissociate, it's not an intentional choice that we make.
Yeah.
That, we kind of just do it maybe out of habit or, whereas as what you were just describing is like, I'm very intentionally going to choose to dissociate right now because this is a tactic. And I also have a plan for reassociating is such an intentional way to move through those things. And so, I've so appreciated this. I'm feeling very appreciative and contemplative and kind of curious. And I want to play with some of the things that we've talked about even more. And so, if those listening hear this and they think what I thought of the first time that you and I met, like, ooh, what a wonderful orbit. Let me be in this person's orbit more. Is there a way that they can connect with you, Colin?
Well, let's see. I'm not really marketing anything these days. You're welcome to listen to my podcast if you want to hear me talk to people more. Superhuman Academy podcast. It's very eclectic and all over the place. If you want to reach out to me directly, you're welcome to reach out to curiosityjumpllc@gmail.com. That's the email connected to my coaching business, which I use here and there. I'll see it eventually. So if you want to reach me that way, that's cool too.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel.